Again. So if you missed the first video, Greg is currently out with a lung infection. So we need to send Greg good vibes, good wishes so he can get better. But yet again, he leaves me with all the best authors, Melanie. So you guys, I'm joined today with Melanie P. Smith, and we're going to be talking about her book, Trigger. And so I'm dying to dive into this book, Melanie. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us all what genre Trigger is, what kind of the summary and plot of Trigger.
So Trigger is I would call it a criminal suspense. It's a vigilante justice book. It's the first book in the series. And it starts off with a young couple. They're out for a romantic evening. They come home and some things happen, and the husband gets murdered by this bad guy that's in town that everybody's afraid of. He's kind of like a drug dealer, mob boss kind of guy that gets away with everything. He corrupts the system. And in comes a group of family and friends that it's the prosecutor, a cop, those are brother and sister, and then they have a cousin who's a military security specialist, and then a best friend who's a computer specialist, and they kind of all come together and decide we're under attack by this mob boss because we went after him, and so we have to fight back. And so they go outside of the system to kind of get justice against this guy.
Nice. Okay. So I feel like there's a story about how this story kind of came about. So where did you find the inspiration or the idea to kind of create this story and storyline?
I wouldn't say that the story was born out of an event or anything. It was just kind of, I have a law enforcement background, and there's always times when you know who the bad guy is, you know who the criminal is, but you just can't prove it. So you know they get away with it. So I guess it was born out of that, just knowing that sometimes the system fails.
Okay, so you're not like an ex-mobster. Yeah, so you're not an ex-mobster and this has happened to you. Okay, no, I get it. I get it. I mean, I bet having that law enforcement background kind of made it easier to write, books like this because you have, in a sense, kind of been in that environment. Maybe not necessarily with the crime kind of happening to you, but you have witnessed and kind of seen these things. So it made it kind of flow easier, I guess, and easier to write than, say, like a fantasy. I mean, would you say that was true for you?
Right. Yeah. I'm a multi-genre author, so I write a lot of different stuff. I would say the easiest ones for me to write are the criminal suspense and the police procedurals because I worked in law enforcement for 26 years.
That makes sense. See, I wouldn't be able to write that. I could do the mobster one because I just have these, like, I guess, wild imagination.
Because you're a closet mobster.
You've caught me. Don't tell nobody, okay? Don't tell nobody. No, like, just, you have like those, like, you have like just the wild imagination of what that life is like, So I feel like from that. But the law enforcement background, I feel like a lot of people that don't have the background like you have would have to do a lot of research into what really happens and different things and twists and turns and different angles that they look at and who all is involved and those kinds of things. So those are easier for you. So was there any part of writing Trigger that was a little bit more, I guess the best word would be like that you had to put like a little more like effort into like research or kind of the background or knowledge kind of behind it? Because the law enforcement one seems like it would be pretty easy. So what was the most difficult part of writing Trigger? No, it wasn't.
No, because I understand like investigations and things like that. So when I do those kinds of books, they're pretty easy. I don't do a whole lot of research into those.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what was the most difficult part of writing Trigger for you, or was it all just relatively easy?
Yeah, I can't think of
A difficult
it
part.
kind of is just easy. Yeah, it's there are some genres, some books that I write that I have to do a lot of research, or that I'm talking about things that I don't know. Like I have a Paige Carter police procedural series that I will do cases, but on occasion I will have her investigating a case where I don't know, like one is an arson. I have a police background, but the fire stuff is a little foreign to me. So I had to do a little more research into the fire stuff to get that right.
Right.
But Trigger, there wasn't any, I didn't really have to do research on that. It just kind of was the story that was, I just fell back on my experience and education and knowledge.
Your background of it. So what was your turnaround time for Trigger? Did you publish it yourself or did you go with a publisher?
I published it myself. That one was pretty quick, actually. There are some books that I write that I can just sit down. The story just comes to me, and I can just sit down and write it like maybe in a month.
Yeah.
And that was one of them. And so that one was pretty easy for me to write. It's my biggest challenge is time. I'm going in a million different directions. And so the story is easy to write. It's the time to sit down and write it that kind of gets in the way.
Yeah. It's all that other day stuff, life stuff you got to go and do when you just want to write.
Yeah.
No, I understand that. So is Trigger a standalone book or is it going to be a series or what does that look like?
It'll be a series.
So how many do you see it being in your series?
I have no idea. I'll just let it go until it ends. As long as the ideas come, I'll continue to do it. So I have no idea.
Yeah, so that way you kind of, just however your creative spark with that storyline kind of continues, you're going to let it run with it, which is nice. So do you have anything else that you're currently working on?
I am always working on several things at a time. I never just sit down and write one thing. Even when I was doing Trigger, I was doing other stuff. So I usually try to get a Christmas story out in December. Okay. And I'm working on I decided this year I was going to do I have a Thin Blue Line criminal suspense theory series, and I decided that I'd do a Christmas story that goes along with that series that has the same characters in it. And so I'm working on that. And then I'm also working on trying to finish up. I have the fantasy Immortal series that is a Greek mythology series, and I'm trying to finish the second book in that series. I'd like to get that one out this year. And then I've also got a kind of a Western romance that I'm about halfway through that one as well.
Nice. So if you had to pick one, right, what would you say is your most fun genre to write in? Since you write in several, which one would be your most fun to write?
I would say the easiest are the police procedurals and the criminal suspense. Because, like I said, I don't have to do a lot of research on those. So those are easy. Just, I'm in the mood to write, sit down and write something, and I can just write. Those are the easiest. The fun are probably the fantasy or the paranormal, because you don't have constraints. You can do whatever your imagination lets you do.
Right.
So those are kind of fun because you can just let your imagination go and write. As long as it's believable, you can pretty much get away with anything.
Nice. So going back to Trigger for a moment, because I want to know, is there a particular scene in that book that is either your favorite scene or was just the hardest for you to write? Not in terms of like background or anything, just because of what all was going on within that scene of your book.
Um, I've added into Trigger, you have this family dynamic that is kind of broken.
Okay.
You've got, like I said, there's the prosecutor and the cop, they're brother and sister, but they're estranged from their father. And the cousin is very close to his uncle, their father. And so there's some emotional family moments that are a little bit difficult. They're because of what the dynamic is. The cousin, the one that's a military guy, he left and went into the military because he came from an abusive family. His dad was abusive, but his father was well respected in the community, so he hid it and nobody knows it. So he has to deal with knowing who the real man was when he's held in such high esteem in the community and the emotions that go with that. So those were a little bit difficult to write just because it was an emotional, some emotional battles between the family.
Yeah. So with like kind of all the emotions and stuff going on, is it easier for you to be writing like multiple things at one time? So like if one gets too heavy or you get like writer's block with one, you can just bounce to the other. Is that kind of easier for you to do? Is that why you work on multiple projects at the same time, or how does that work for you?
I've just always done multiple things at a time. Even when I was in law enforcement, I had all these projects going, so I could just sit down and say, okay, that one bores me, I'm going to go move on to this one today. When I was growing up, I grew up on a farm, and so we always had a very active lifestyle, and I think that's probably carried over to. I don't know that I've ever gotten writer's block because I work on so many projects at the same time. So if like a scene isn't moving forward on this one, I'll just pick up another one and go, okay, well, maybe I'll work on that one today, and things will move. So I think it just works for me to work on a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. I just bumped my table. I'm jiggling a little bit here, but so yeah, it just works for me to do a whole bunch of stuff at the same time.
See, I just feel like, I'm in awe of that because for me, right, like I take care of my kids and I work, I do all that. At the end of the day, I'm like mentally exhausted. So I can only imagine you guys at the end of the day that are writing on multiple genres, kind of bouncing back and forth between multiple. And that one has to be mentally draining by the end of the day, switching from storyline and genre throughout the day.
I guess it can be, but for me, writing is more relaxing than draining. So like when life gets too hectic, I can just sit down and kind of get lost in the story and come out of it more refreshed than exhausted.
See, this is
It's
why
kind of an escape.
Yeah. See, this is why I just live vicariously through authors, and I haven't written a book simply because of It's relaxing and stuff. I would be so anal about certain things, be like, no, this just doesn't look right. This sentence doesn't flow. Like, I wouldn't be able to do it. I couldn't. So I live vicariously through you guys and like your experiences, you know, that you kind of, your law enforcement background that you tie into Trigger. And then, you know, you do, you know, fantasy and stuff for fun and creating your own, and there's less limitations kind of on those genres, and your creativity can really fly versus, you know, like, just, to me, that just is so stressful. I love working with authors and hanging out with you guys. The world would be such a boring place if we didn't have authors, especially like you that write in multi-genre. But it just is, man, the creativity and the things that inspire you guys to run rampant with these stories and create these worlds and stories and take us out of reality for a little bit are amazing. So I have mad respect for authors, and especially ones that can work on, like, you know, 10 different storylines at the same time, because that's overwhelming for me, and I do a lot. So if people want to get different genres of your books, because you write in multi-genres, or they want to buy Trigger, how can they get in touch with you? How can they find your books? Where are you at?
My books are everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, you know, everywhere. Just look for Melanie P. Smith. I have a website, melaniepsmith.com. And I am also working on getting my books in audiobook. So I have several of them in audiobook as well. And you can get them anywhere you buy your audiobooks, iTunes, Audible, Spotify, anywhere.
Wonderful. Well, Melanie, thanks so much for coming back and hanging out with me. It's always fun to have conversations about all the genres that you write in, but specifically about Trigger and your law enforcement background, because it has been so much fun to get to talk to you again.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, we hope
appreciate you having me.
Oh, of course. Well, we hope everybody has a great rest of their Tuesday, and hopefully Greg will be back next week or this evening. But until then, bye for now, everybody.